Rich, did you have a good 4th of July?
Yeah, it was great. Kiddo turned 3 on the 1st, had some family out here, did some grilling. It was a great, relaxing, peaceful time. What about you, JJ?
It was good. Family went to the beach. We had a condo, like an Airbnb situation. Everything was great. 4th of July was good. We got to see some fireworks, all that good stuff. But I will say, we were in this condo, and above us, there was a family presumably staying. And at 5 a.m. every morning, I don't know what they were running wind sprints. I'm not exactly sure, but they would wake us up at 5 a.m. every single morning on this vacation. And I gotta say, to this family, I hope on the way home from vacation, you hit every single red light on the road. I'm JJ, and I've been playing in best ball leagues for years. But there are people out there who play a lot more than I do, and there are people out there who have won a lot more than I have. And I want to learn from them. This season, I'll be documenting my journey of max entering Underdog's Best Ball Mania contest. And I'll be doing so with guidance from some of the most successful best ball players on the planet. This is the year where things start to change. This is the year where I officially become a best ball bro. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, and joined as always by Rich Ryan. Rich, we were out last week. How you been?
Doing good. Yeah, nice relaxing week. Get back here in the best ball streets. We've got some ADP that I want to look at since the start of this podcast, since episode 1. I max regged my first ever contest. Granted, it was a 4 max entry, the Chihuahua 3, but I, like you, well on my way to being a best ball bro with a max reg. Look at me.
Was that a all live draft one?
No, that wasn't one of those fast drafts, which is also excellent. I mean, look at you, immediate pivot to things that people want and are thirsting for. No, it's been tough for me with no like real work structure and time to sit and do fast drafts, to do any of these lightning fast drafts, but definitely intriguing for times where I just have like a half hour that I just want to bang one out. Like I almost wish, and I think it's probably a regulatory issue or just a rules issue. I wish they could just sneak them in for BBM, because that would make getting to a substantial number of drafts for me a lot easier.
Yeah, that's for sure. I did some of those super fast, 10-second clock drafts with the mini schnauzer, I think it was, whenever they took those. There was 3 of them. One was the 10-second clock, one was the 15-second, one was the 20-second. I didn't do any of the 15 or 20 seconds, but I did probably 5 to 10 of the or however many, maybe 5 of the 10-second clock ones. I enjoyed it. I think it gives people who kind of know their stuff and understand correlation and where guys go and the playoff matchups and such off the top of their head. I think it gives them a little bit of an advantage because you're able to think quickly on your feet, and you're also able to get a lot of value because people are sliding and people are making irrational decisions. They don't know what they're doing. They're panicking. It's a lot of fun, and trust me, I'm prepared. I'm probably more prepared than the majority of drafters at this point. I've done about 300 drafts so far, post NFL draft. And even still, for me, it's still like a very electrifying experience doing those drafts with only 10-second clocks.
You've also written a damn 210-page guide, which just dropped and is in inboxes of many viewers and listeners. By the way, you can still see it on the bottom below. If you make a deposit on Udoo, you get a free draft guide as well. Once again, I'm allowed to shill as a paid member. You cannot.
Yeah, it's easier for you to do it than me. I always feel like I know that I do it every episode and I do it on Twitter and all this kind of stuff. I still get uncomfortable being like, hey, I put a lot of effort into this draft guide. Go buy this thing.
Yeah, but
I will say,
it's your livelihood, bro.
I know it is my livelihood. It is my livelihood. But I will say, of all pieces of content that I've ever done in my life, so I've been doing fantasy football stuff for a dozen years at this point. This guide is most definitely the thing that I put the most effort, time, all of that into. And I hope it reads that way. I hope people at the end of the day, they walk away and they say, man, I'm looking at fantasy football a little bit differently now that I read this thing.
I texted you right after a chapter. I have a tough keeper decision in my longtime high school keeper league between two players, and I read one of the chapters, and I was leaning one way, and you completely sold me. So yeah, like JJ says, whether it be here on the pod or even in the guide itself, it's not about giving you a list of players and telling you who to pick and when to pick them. It's how to think and how to apply certain things to even a goofy keeper league that I have. I was able to apply principles that JJ laid out, and they're very actionable. So go get the damn guide.
Love to hear that. Speaking of the guide, you can get some Underdog takes in there as well, where I'm laying out players to target, players to avoid, et cetera, et cetera. I got to talk about, Rich, this team that I draft. Like, people don't really care about teams that I'm drafting. I get it. Like, you don't care about my fantasy teams or anything like that. If you do, I am posting my Best Ball Mania teams, almost every single one that I do, in the Late Round Fantasy Football Discord. There's a few comments on each one, and we kind of, people were asking questions and all that kind of stuff. But there was one that I posted to Twitter, which I don't often do because I'm not trying to be that obnoxious person. I'll say this. One of the things that I've noticed in the best ball streets and while becoming a best ball bro, there are so many people that love to post their lineups after like 5 picks, right? It tells us nothing. Yeah. It tells us absolutely nothing. Anyone can look good through 5 picks depending on how a draft. Like, if it's wide receiver heavy and you're like, hey, look, I got Derrick Henry in the 4th round. Look how good this team is. Well, okay, but it's wide receiver heavy. Your wide receivers are probably going to suck, right? Like, there's a reason that Derrick Henry is going in that spot. So I think it's important to look at it holistically and look at, the greater picture. And so I posted the entirety of this lineup, right? I had never been in a draft. Again, I've done over 300. If you count pre-draft stuff, I've done over 400 this year. I haven't been in a draft where value fell the way that it fell in this draft. I know that you've seen this lineup, right? Like you saw the team. It's crazy. Jahmyr Gibbs, I ended up getting at 19th overall when his ADP is 13th overall. Jamar Chase, I got 6th overall when his ADP is 4th overall. But just throughout the draft, like I got Najee. I'll just read you the team. Anthony Richardson and Joe Burrow are the quarterbacks. Okay, I usually don't go with that elite of a quarterback group, but Joe Burrow fell about a little over a round past ADP, and I had Jamar Chase, and so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. Anthony Richardson, I paired with Michael Pittman, who went 10 picks. Michael Pittman went 10 picks after ADP. So those are my 2 quarterbacks. Running backs are Jahmyr Gibbs, Najee Harris, Tajay Spears. Spears and Harris both went 5 to 10 picks past ADP. Jaleel McLaughlin, I got around ADP. Antonio Gibson and Braylon Allen. Then Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, 4 picks after ADP. Michael Pittman, 10 spots after ADP. DeAndre Hopkins around ADP. A.D. Mitchell to get with the stack with Anthony Richardson. Dontavian Wicks, who, in what world does Dontavian Wicks these days go 17 or 18 picks past ADP? Because that's what happened.
You were in the one draft. You were in the one draft where
the only draft where Dontavian Wicks goes well after ADP. And then Jermaine Burton, I got to pair up with Joe Burrow. So I have Burrow to Burton and Jamar Chase. And then at tight end, I got George Kittle about 10 spots after ADP. So I had the correlation of Jahmyr Gibbs and George Kittle for week 17. And then Jelani Woods and Mike Gesicki for the tight end correlation with the quarterbacks on the team. So the correlation is there throughout the lineup. And then the other nice part is there's a shared opponent with Indianapolis and Cincinnati in the fantasy playoffs, which is Tennessee. And I have DeAndre Hopkins and Tajay Spears in that lineup. So it really all came together. The one thing I'll say, and the one criticism I got, was this should have been a 2 tight end build. So I got George Kittle, and then I went and I got Jelani Woods and Mike Gesicki. A lot of people were saying, and maybe a handful of people were saying that I probably should have just gone with one of those tight ends and then gotten a New York Giants wide receiver to pair with the Colts stack, like get a Slayton or a Jalen Hyatt. And I think in hindsight, that's probably right. But the fact that I posted something on Twitter where thousands of people are seeing this, and the biggest critique is an 18th round pick.
You screwed up round 18, exactly.
Yeah, right. I will take that all day long. I'll take that all day long. Yeah. But it was just one of those drafts that really came together.
Yeah, no, I'm just pulling up round 18 as you said it, and the pivot that I see there, is Jalen Hyatt, who's usually going at 212.7. Obviously can't see who was drafted if Slayton was gone by then. He usually goes at the top of the 18th round. But yeah, I mean, flip a coin. There's obviously nice correlation there with your opponent in having a giant, but it's so funny. The first thing I looked at this when I saw it, I didn't see Jamar Chase at first, and I messaged you. I was like, oh, Burrow slipped. Nice job just grabbing Burton and Gesicki and creating a nice little Bengal stack. Not knowing you had one of the best wide receivers in the entire NFL also in that stack.
Yeah. It was just one of those drafts that really came together, and it wasn't a draft where there was any there were some teams in there that were doing some stupid things and suboptimal things. Like Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes went to the same team, and they were both drafted a round earlier than they typically go. And then that team, I believe, ended up with 4 quarterbacks, but it wasn't like there wasn't some malicious intent, clearly or seemingly, right? It wasn't someone throwing or anything like that. It was literally just some suboptimal drafters, and I just fell to the right spot. I then also saw some tweets about people who say that Sunday nights seem to be a night where this kind of thing tends to happen, where you get, I don't know if it's like people are just like, oh, I have to go to work tomorrow. I'm going to just fire this off.
They just want to blast a draft.
They're just making their life feel a little bit, making themselves feel a little bit better by doing one of these drafts. But I don't know, man. I mean, I've talked about this, I think that Friday nights and Saturday nights are kind of interesting to do these live drafts because people are doing some of these extracurricular activities, going out to bars and stuff like that and getting hammered. It's the same deal in Rocket League whenever I play on a Friday or Saturday night and I'm totally sober and people are terrible. And I can see my rank just rise and rise and rise because they're clearly, doing other things, which is fine, whatever. But it's a way that we can kind of take advantage of what's going on because this is a peer-to-peer game at the end of the day. It's no different than if you're playing poker and people are drunk playing poker, you can destroy those people who are drunk.
I know European cash game pros who made a ton of money in the mid to late 2000s getting up first thing Saturday morning and grinding cash against people who would be stumbling home from the bar in America and blasting away. That is a real thing that happened.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the bottom line. This is a peer-to-peer game. This is a game that we're playing other humans, and we're trying to beat other humans. Try to find every edge that you possibly can find. I don't know if there's actually anything to that. We got to get like Leone to dig into this or something like that because I'm not going to dig into something like that. But I do think that there's at least a hypothesis as to why a weekend night might be beneficial for some of these live drafts. But at the end of the day, I did that on Sunday night. It ended up being probably the best value, not probably, the best value draft that I've had all summer. It's probably not going to end up being a finalist or anything like that. But, on paper, it looks very, very good.
We're looking for razor thin margins in these things with how many smart people are playing these. So, and any kind of edge you think you can get, it's probably worthwhile in taking. Now, we've talked a lot about fast drafts here. How is your transition going? Are you slowly phasing out those slow drafts and starting to fire up more fast drafts?
Yeah, I mean, I had some regrets about joining as many, all those puppies that I joined. Whenever I literally at one point, I think had 130 slow drafts going at once. And it's finally, whenever I get to, the first couple batches have ended, and like I'm into the 17th, 18th round. And then when you get that check mark, that
double
completed,
check mark. Oh man.
Yeah, you feel so good. So now I'm not as much in slow draft hell. What I'm really transitioning and trying to do is a couple BBMs a day. So right now, and I did 2 of them today back to back before we started recording this, but right now my BBM count, I believe, is at 45, which, I think we probably have a month with a little change left to get this, let's say 40 days, right? And so, if I do 2 of them a day, that's 80 drafts. That'll get me at least a little bit. I'm going to have to do 3 to 4 in some days. You know what I mean? But we've talked about this before. I've just found myself as a better drafter in these live drafts as opposed to the slow drafts. I'm just trying to get through them quickly to get to the next pick and then go to bed. Whereas the fast drafts, you're just honed in. That's the one thing that you're thinking of. You can do a little work on the side or do whatever on the side as well, but you're at least focused on that individual team build and you understand the draft room a little bit better. And I want to be optimal with my picks. I don't envision myself, especially with Best Ball Mania. Other contests, I'll probably do some slows. But with Best Ball Mania, I think moving forward, I'm only going to be doing fast drafts.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Lower buy-in, you're just trying to get that volume in, get those reps in, and then with BBM, since there's so much more value at the top, you want to be a little more focused. All right, I teased some ADP changes since we first recorded on episode 1. I'm going to give you the biggest gainers and the biggest fallers at each position over those. It's been almost 2 months now, close to 2 months.
Yeah. Yep.
So biggest gainers at quarterback is Daniel Jones, up 10 spots. Running back Braylon Allen, up 27.7 spots. The number one gainer of all players, your boy, Pop Douglas, up
Don't forget
5 spots, JJ.
Don't forget that in the big boards, I remember the first episode of this show, I was going through my exposure from the big board drafts, and Pop Douglas was like 3rd or 4th on the list for me because he was going in like round 17, basically where, he goes like round 15, 16 now, or maybe even 14 at times. But regardless, he was someone that I just kept. I mean, this was pre-draft before they even got Javon Baker and Jalen Polk. But look, I think that a lot of times people, and Leone really shed light to this, I think, in the interview that I did with him, where it doesn't always, I think that people think about best ball as you got to get these like super high upside, big play receivers, like a Jalen Hyatt or something like that. Like you got to fill your team with those guys. It's like, no, look, Pop Douglas in the right scenario, the right situation can be fine. He's a really good slot player, a twitchy slot player. He could easily lead that team in target share this year. And if that happens, then why wouldn't he have some usable weeks? Like I don't. If we look back and we see that Demario Douglas had 5 or 6 usable weeks this year, no one should be shocked by that because he could lead that team in targets.
All the way up to 155.9, end of the 13th round.
Yeah, even that's honestly, I haven't gotten him that much recently, and that's probably why. Yeah.
At tight end, it's Noah Fant, who is a great pair for our guy Geno Smith. He's up 14 spots, but I'm way more interested in the fallers, and I'll start with the non-quarterbacks first. Austin Eckler down 18 spots, Zay Jones down 15, and Ben Sinnott. The summer of Sinnott is over, down 23.
I don't know why.
Spots.
I don't
Everybody
know why
loved him at the start of the summer.
I don't know why he was going where he was going. I didn't draft him at all. I still don't really draft him. But maybe it's the looking at last season and the rookie tight ends and how well they performed. Brock Bowers, I'm trying to get a little bit more of, but Sinnott, it's just like I never. I thought he was a fine prospect, maybe an above average prospect. Don't get me wrong, but it was just weird. Like he probably won't be the number 2 option in that offense, more than likely, right? And they still have Zach Ertz too. I mean, it's not like he's the locked in alone tight end 1 on the team.
Quarterback, where it gets interesting. So we got JJ McCarthy down 25.9 spots, which makes sense with the Sam Darnold buzz coming out of Minnesota. But then Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, and Caleb Williams are all down more than a round. People do not want, if they don't have stacks for these quarterbacks, they are not touching these players with a 35-foot pole, JJ.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what this comes down to, right? Is that all of those quarterbacks, I mean, look, the JJ McCarthy thing is 100% driven by Sam Darnold and all the stuff that's coming out with that. But nothing's really gone on with Burrow. If anything, we've heard more optimism about the injury and stuff like that. And then CJ Stroud, nothing's gone on with. Caleb Williams, nothing's gone on with. But all 3 of those quarterbacks have very stackable players, that we're attaching them to, right? And so you'll often see if you get 2 of them, let's say, like if you get Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and I actually talk about this in the interview today, but if you get T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, if you have both of them, you can squeeze out a lot of value from Joe Burrow. There's no reason to reach for Burrow. And if someone gets Burrow, again, we've talked about this, you got to just be okay with it, tilt a little bit, but you got to move on. But like CJ Stroud, same deal. Like if you've done 20 plus drafts, you've seen one of these guys slide at some point. I saw Caleb Williams in a draft that I was doing. I actually drafted Keenan Allen, and I was hoping that I could get the value out of Williams, but didn't. But regardless, I saw him drop a lot too. It really just comes down to those guys being stackable, and I think teams realizing that they can own the room a little bit because the rest of the teams in that league aren't going to draft a naked Burrow or a naked Stroud. With that being said, Rich, I do think that we're about to see a rise in quarterback ADP in general because we're going to see more casual players jump in. And when we see more casual players jump in, we're going to see more. I don't even think they're necessarily going to draft quarterbacks earlier. They might, but I think it's going to be, we see more unpredictability. And when there's more unpredictability, we're going to say to ourselves, I don't know what this crazy dude is going to do when I have Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and I really want Kirk Cousins, and I could maybe squeeze out another round. I might just get Cousins right now because this team who has a completely uncorrelated lineup, who is doing crazy things throughout this draft, this team might end up just drafting Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. And sometimes it's even good to does the username have a badge next to it, right? If the username has a badge next to it, that person is probably looking more at correlation. They already took a quarterback. They probably won't double up on quarterback. These assumptions can be made. But yeah, we've said this a lot. When there's uncertainty in the market, that drives value, but it's also going to drive insanity.
Yeah, right. Like it can drive the opposite direction too. The one thing I will say is that while you're drafting, like if you're at the 10 or 11 spot or something like that, at one of the ends, right? Or like the 3 or 4 or something like that, where you can kind of play the board a little bit based on what the teams after you are going to be doing. Take a look at those teams while you're drafting, and don't just look at the positions that they draft. But what I've been doing is I look at how correlated and how smart the lineup looks, right? Like if they have a naked Purdy and it's round 14, then I know that person is going to be doing some crazy stuff moving forward or throughout the draft. Or you can even tell earlier on in that draft, but that can really help you out in getting somewhat of an advantage, because then, okay, I might have to reach maybe half a round to get this quarterback to complete this stack, as opposed to really squeezing it out because I know that these teams are going to be rational about it.
All right, let's get into some focuses. You talked about Brock Bowers. You're really interested right now in that Njoku Bowers, maybe even Engram Ferguson tier. We've talked a ton about elite tight end, but let's talk about some more middle to late round tight ends.
Yeah, look, this is something that I talk about with our guest today a little bit because he is a proponent of this tier. And I think more than most are. I just have an issue in getting the tier because I am drafting elite tight end, guys in the 4th to 6th round fairly frequently. And so when I get that, then I'm like, okay, I don't really need to double up and get one of these other tight ends in the 9th or 10th round. I will say, there are times where if I feel good about my build and how things are going, I'll get a Bowers and pair him with a McBride or something like that and just get, kind of a powerhouse situation going there where, you might be able to get a flex out of them some weeks, but also you're hurting the rest of the room. So you're helping yourself be able to potentially move on, into the playoffs. But I think it really comes down to the fact that I've been going after the elite guys a lot. And then once I get into those rounds, I'm not drafting those players that much. And then also, if I don't get an elite player, I'm just looking at running backs a lot in that range because it's sort of that ambiguous part of the draft where the zero RB backs really sit and lie. So I'm forcing myself to get more, especially Njoku. I think Njoku is the one that I was just underweight on. Like I had enough Ingram because I've been building so many Tennessee and Jacksonville stacks. But Njoku, I was probably only a couple days ago, I was probably only at like 3 or 4% at most Njoku, when I probably want to be around like 6-ish, just based on how much elite tight end I'm getting. And then I don't mind getting like 3 late round tight ends. But then Bowers too. I want to be at or a little bit above market, I think, with Brock Bowers this year at the end of the day.
So bully tight end has been really interesting. I've seen a lot of people talking about this on Twitter, and it's interesting to me because it gives you the biggest leg up, I think, on the ends of the tournament, because by taking a second tight end, like you just said, you take it away from the pool with which you're competing against for the start of the season. And then at the end, you're likely to see teams with fewer, I would assume, bully tight end builds, which gives you a uniqueness to your team once you hit that 500 player field towards the end. It's like in DFS, when you go tight end flex, it's extremely unique. It also saves you a bunch of money. So I think it's interesting. I'm not all the way there. I personally, I've not been able to pull the trigger, even though it's been interesting, but I definitely understand the thought process.
Yeah, I think that bully tight end, I haven't done it with like Kincaid Kelsey, right? Or like Laporta Pitts or anything like that. Like I think that's, just anecdotally, definitely haven't done a ton of research on it, although I know others have and have said that the win rates aren't necessarily like amazing. I could be wrong though by saying that, but regardless, I feel really uncomfortable doing that, right? But when the opportunity cost is a 10th or even sometimes 11th round pick when these guys fall for that second tight end, when you know that that group and that cluster still has, like Brock Bowers still has top 6 tight end upside. Like he's that good of a prospect. Like he's an unbelievably, I feel like it's been lost because of the destination and where he landed. And look, I was not into that at all, because I think that a team like the Raiders, who took Brock Bowers when they have so many other needs and they already have Michael Mayer, I don't feel confident that they're going to use him properly, right? Like, I don't think that's irrational to think that way. But if we're looking solely at ceiling, which is kind of what we're trying to do, is looking at that upper range of outcomes for these players in best ball, winning a tournament, you have to be able to see that range with Brock Bowers. Maybe I won't get as much Bowers in like a managed season long league, depending on where his ADP falls. I don't really know, so don't think that that's a take. But I do think that he does make sense in this kind of format. And I don't mind pairing him with Ingram, especially like an Ingram Bowers. Actually did that in a BBM before this stream. But even like a McBride, like I said, I think that you can get away with doing something like that.
That double mid-late round is always nice too, because you're like kind of worried, but then you go boom, boom, and you're like, okay, I'm set at tight end.
Right,
I don't
I'm
even
done.
have to think about it. The first thing I did this morning when I dug into ADP is I wanted to look at Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, because like Bowers, I just feel like there's so much Vegas hate in all of these drafts that I'm doing. Anecdotally, I'm seeing Devontae and Jacoby go like half round, full round later than ADP, but their ADP hasn't budged much. Yeah. Week over week, but I'm assuming a slide is going to come, just because I don't know. I just feel like you said, people are pretty cold on this Vegas team. Week 15, week 16, starting to look at those game stacks. You talked about it in the value draft that you had, looking for common opponents throughout the playoffs, not just in week 17. What other matchups? What other things you're looking at in week 15, week 16?
Yeah, I mean, there's that one like triumvirate, if you will, of Minnesota, Green Bay, and Seattle. I think are the 3 teams where they play each other. All 3 of them play in Chicago. There's the 4. I guess there's 4 teams that you could literally. Seattle gets Green Bay, Minnesota, and Chicago, and then Chicago gets Minnesota, Detroit, Seattle, and then Green Bay gets Seattle, New Orleans, Minnesota. There's just a very, very good correlation there. And then I don't know if I said Minnesota, but they get Chicago, Seattle, Green Bay. But yeah, it's just a very, very good correlation there. If you're starting to build and compile teams, it's a very easy go-to. But I have seemed to be attracted a lot towards Jacksonville, Tennessee in that week 17 game. But while I'm doing that, all I'm doing is I have a sheet where I'm looking at week 15, week 16 matchups. I don't have those memorized. I only have week 17 memorized.
Get it together. Get it together.
Yeah, I know. I don't think that's going to happen. But I'm looking at sort of what as I'm drafting and I'm seeing value drop and stuff. Like, I'm not that concerned, or I should say, I'm not overly concerned about getting correlation through the first 4 or 5 rounds of my draft. Would I ideally like it? Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, if I get Marvin Harrison Jr., hopefully I could get Cooper Kupp or something like that, right? Like, that's great. But I'm not going to force the issue that much, because I want to extract a lot of value in those early rounds and kind of get a differentiated portfolio and such. And so when I see that and when I do that, then once I get into round 5, round 6, round 7, that's when I'm really starting to think more about correlation. And as I'm building those team stacks, I'm naturally just looking at what I did in the first 4 rounds or so to sort of say, okay, I can go with this guy instead of this guy because I drafted Keenan Allen in the 5th or something like that, right? Like, it's a way of sort of making your decision for you, that week 15, week 16, those game stacks. And I think it's, a way that obviously can bring a little bit more upside too to your lineup.
Yeah, it's definitely a great tiebreaker. All right, let's get into some specific player takes. We talked about David Njoku about a bit there. You can add if you want to, but the next player on the list, you brought up Titans Jags briefly there, is the man who puts mayonnaise in his coffee, Will Levis.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. I look back at the puppy and now DeAndre Hopkins, who I talked about a couple weeks ago on the show. Hopkins is now one of my highest roster players, partially because I just kept drafting him in the puppy. And naturally, because I got, at the time I was drafting Hopkins, and in those slow drafts I was doing in the puppy, I was only in like round 9 or so of most of those drafts. Now those drafts have concluded, and I've realized that, I got a lot of Will Levis now too, because I got Hopkins and I wanted to pair him, with his quarterback. But, Levis is someone who I talk about as a target, as a late round dart throw in the late round draft guide. He's my highest exposed quarterback right now. It's only at 12%, to be fair. I don't have massive exposure to any individual quarterback, but he is at 12%, so it's higher, maybe 13%. He had a crazy average up the target last year. Obviously, we know he has a big arm. Brian Callahan's now in Tennessee. Even before Joe Burrow, he was the OC for Cincinnati for a year, and that year they were an incredibly pass-heavy offense. I think that this is part of his DNA. And look at everything Tennessee did during the offseason. You know, the running back that they add to tandem with Tajay Spears is a dual threat, backfield mate in Tony Pollard. They go out and they sign Calvin Ridley. They're doing things to make this a more dynamic, pass-friendly offense. They get Tyler Boyd too. They're doing things to make this a more friendly, pass-heavy offense. And so bring that all together. You got strong weapons in Hopkins and Ridley. Boyd is fine as a slot. Chigakonkwo is not a bad tight end, pass-catching tight end that is. And so and you have two good running backs in that backfield. I just think it's kind of coming together for Will Levis to outplay his ADP, which is not budged a ton. Like he's still QB 24. I think that, you could argue him over a Geno. You could argue him over a Baker when he'll go around later than those guys. And if you lock in Ridley and Hopkins in round 5 and round 6, then you're almost definitely going to be able to get Levis past ADP.
Yeah, it's every time I see at the top of my queue anybody from this Jags-Titans game, I'm immediately interested in it.
Yeah.
Me too. And the running backs, the only person that I'm not super exposed to is ETN, just because I prefer taking a more elite running back than someone going that high. But everybody else from this game, I am so comfortable clicking. And then, Levis is just such a natural fit. You don't have to invest much. You get an easy stack out of it. We talked about this way back in episode 1. The Patriots, the Titans, the Panthers are just your great break glass in case of emergency stack that you can just put together towards the end of the draft. And then Marshawn Lloyd. Josh Jacobs going all the way in the 5th round. Marshawn Lloyd all the way in the 12th, getting a 7th round discount on somebody with great upside.
Yeah, I think that the market is still kind of wrong about how this backfield's going to play out. Like, I don't mind Jacobs at times in the 5th, especially if I get Justin Jefferson in the 1st and I want, that's when I start thinking more about game stacks and such in week 17. So I'll get Josh Jacobs because Minnesota plays Green Bay. But, I just think that people are understating, Matt LaFleur's love for a split backfield. We saw him split in Tennessee with Derrick Henry and Dion Lewis. Henry wasn't totally Derrick Henry yet at that point in time, but even still, Dion Lewis was also horrid that season. And then we've seen it throughout his time in Green Bay, right? With Aaron Jones, and Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, et cetera, et cetera. I was also listening to Establish the Run. I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but at times I'll throw on some, and ETR is an easy one to go to with my buddies over there with Silva and Adam Levitan. And they were talking about some reports in this backfield, and Silva had made mention that when they got rid of Aaron Jones, when they got Josh Jacobs, it sounded like LaFleur thought that they were also going to be keeping Aaron Jones in that backfield. And then they got rid of Aaron Jones, and now, obviously it's Josh Jacobs' quote unquote backfield, but look at what they did next. What they did was they went to the NFL draft, spent a day 2 pick on Marshawn Lloyd, who, I didn't love Marshawn Lloyd as a prospect, but he did, and I even wrote about this. He's a really, really good change of pace player. Like, he's a great tandem back, in my opinion. And then those kinds of players in a 1 week, 2 week sample, if someone gets hurt, they can be fine and they can be a workhorse in that small, I think if Josh Jacobs got hurt in week 3, then they might want to do something about the running back position because this is a contending team. But if Josh Jacobs gets hurt in like week 14 or week 13 and they need Marshawn Lloyd for a few weeks, I think he could carry the load and be solid. I mean, he's a really, really dynamic guy. I think he's more athletic immediately and more dynamic than Josh Jacobs is. And I do think that all of this just plays into the idea that LaFleur wants a split backfield to some degree. So I have Marshawn Lloyd. I think I'm at like 16 or 17% Marshawn Lloyd through my draft so far. And I don't think that's going to reach like 20%, where like I'm at with like Zach Charbonnet right now. But I do think that he's a very, very good value still.
Charb's another play player in that triumvirate. It's all those teams I feel like we've talked about every week for becoming best ball player. So happy to have exposure in all of them. All right.
Yes.
Let's kick it on over to James.
Yeah. Let's talk about this interview. So I talked to James Brimacombe, who is a high volume best ball player. I think that he approaches the game a little bit differently than some of the other guests that I've had on the show, which is great. I think that, obviously I do late round perspectives, so people get other perspectives from people. I kind of feel similarly with becoming a best ball bro. I'm trying to absorb all this information from these people who have been playing high volume for years and years, and not just been playing, but high volume playing. And that's what James does. So we talked about why he's kind of a different player than others within the space and others that you might have listened to on this show. We talked about some of his highest exposed players, which I think a couple of them are kind of shocking that people will be surprised to hear. But there's a lot more. I mean, it was a great conversation. I think you guys will enjoy it. So without further ado, let's talk to James. This episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. There's no better place to play best ball than at Underdog. There are leagues starting all the time, and you can choose whether you want to do a slow draft or a fast one when entering one of those leagues. And you don't just have to play Best Ball Mania to play best ball at Underdog. There's a wide variety of contests to choose from. You can even check out Underdog's other games as well, like Pick'em. Right now, you can get in on the action with a deposit offer and free copy of the late round draft guide just by signing up and depositing. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app. When you sign up, use promo code LATEROUND and make a deposit for a deposit offer and a free copy of the late round draft guide. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. Now back to the show. So James, something that you said to me when we were sort of planning out this interview was that you're not the typical best ball drafter and that you seem to zag more than sort of the rest of the than the rest of the community. Can you expand on that idea a little bit and talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, like best ball I've been playing for probably since it started, the MFL 10 kind of days. And I think just like we were seeing the explosion of content, right? Like there's content creators now everywhere that best ball is the thing. That's where you want to be in the space. So with that comes like a lot of like similar ideas, similar takes, like just follow the leader kind of thing, which isn't a bad thing, because I think a lot of that's backed up by a lot of data as well. Like people are diving into that and showing great metrics and different angles of what works and what doesn't in these big tournaments. But at the same time, like we have 18 rounds in these underdog drafts and these tournament drafts, and like I like to draft hundreds of these teams. After you draft 100 teams, you probably know this too. Every team feels exactly the same. Yeah, like it's just on repeat. So like if I feel like that, I'm assuming the 11 other drafters in my draft room are feeling that as well. So like I don't try to be too extreme. Like I focus more on the roster construction as a whole rather than, like I should take wide receiver to start. Like I think I can switch that up and then maybe go 6 receivers after that or things like that. So yeah, I'm looking at different angles there to get me a little bit off script. And at the same time, it's like best ball is supposed to be fun. So for me, those drafts are the most fun when I'm just a little bit different, even if it's like 1 pick or 2 picks, how you normally win a draft. And especially in those first rounds, like I think all those picks are pretty decent. So
yeah, I think that you bring up a good point though with the content in the way that, I mean, look, I'm guilty obviously becoming a best ball bro and doing the series of doing more best ball content and such. But I've talked to Mike Leone from Establish the Run. I've talked to a lot of these data driven, data heavy analysts who are looking at previous historic, best ball mania contests, let's say. And I think that it's not even on them. It's not even on the analyst who is sort of forcing this optimal roster construction and this optimal way to draft. I think it's more so they're seeing it and I even talked to Leone about this. He's seeing it from the standpoint of probability, but it's really important from a messaging standpoint to allow people to understand that this is just what we've seen, and this is sort of the optimal way that it's worked in the past. And you're probably going to have a better chance to win if you go with this sort of approach, if you go, have 4 wide receivers through 7 rounds, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's really, really important for people to understand that there's a massive gray area, which is, I think, is what you're really getting to here.
Yeah, I think similar. Yeah, exactly like that. And Leone is like the best at the diving into the data, right? So like I listen to everything out there, and I appreciate everyone's hard work and all their insights. And honestly, like I'm drafting the way a lot of people are saying, but I'm just not doing 100% of my drafts. So like 50% of my drafts, I'm doing it that way, and then I'm kind of going off script a little bit on the other ones.
Yeah,
it depends like what your budget is and what you want to do, or if you just want to go all in on a certain strategy, that's fine too. And I think, there's little edges there. The data showed it. And I think you're going to get to a good spot either way. So
yeah, makes total sense. So regarding some of these strategies, one of them obviously is stacking within your builds. And I think, as July and August hits and we get folks kind of entering the best ball arena, if you will, who haven't been drafting in May and June, who are probably a little bit more casual, maybe we'll only do 20 drafts this season, we're probably going to see a lot of people that aren't stacking as much just because they don't necessarily understand the correlation aspect of things. I've gotten people, I'm sure you get people who send screenshots of their teams and they say, hey, how's this team look? And then you look at it and there's literally no stack at all. Their quarterbacks are completely, there's no pass catcher that's correlated with those quarterbacks. But to you, how important is stacking to your builds? And that's not just, same team stacking. That's also, in these playoff contests like Best Ball Mania, how much are you focused on week 17 game stacks and even week 15 and week 16 game stacks?
No, that's a great question. So yeah, I think that's like, if you're new to best ball, that's kind of like the 101 of best ball, right? It's like stacking, right? You just want a QB with a pass catcher or whatever. Like that's the most basic way you can go. But I think I even gave a lot of pushback to that early on. Like I was just I come from a football guy's background, so it's always value-based drafting, like I really looking for value all the time. And, hey, I can get this quarterback that falls 30 spots. Like that's the way I used to be more focused on. And I think that's more like total points. We're looking at total points week to week, cumulative scoring kind of formats. But in these best ball tournaments, they're totally opposite. So you have to kind of think a lot outside the box. But the last like 3 years, I got kind of more onto the stacking, and I think that came more with I played a lot of playoff best ball. And you basically had to have a whole team stack. So that part of the game actually helped my regular season part, where I just like my mind focused more on, hey, I want these good offenses. I want this team that I feel like, they're going to be, by the time week 14 comes around, they're actually going to be a good team. So I'm looking more at like what a team value is to me, what players are on that team, and kind of what like value where I can get those players. Like if I can, like right now, like Dallas and San Fran, I feel like I can get like those QBs pretty late, and like probably the best passing offenses out there too. So things like that I'm looking at. Week 17 stuff, like I'm still not 100% on board with that, but I get it. But I think that's more, I don't draft a single team at a time. Like I'm drafting like 3, 4, 5 teams, fast drafts at a time, because I just want to get the volume. That's more important to me. But I think if I was just doing best ball manias at one at a time and just had an hour just to focus and do all the things sitting on a computer, then I would look at the week 17 thing. But at the time, I just don't have time to do that. And I think naturally, if you're stacking QB and pass catchers, like you're going to fall into those stacks anyway. Like anytime I don't have week 17 memorized. It's probably bad on me. And like, I'm trying to get to that point. It's like, I'm still learning as best ball player. But in my focus, I think would be more week 16 if I had to. I played Best Ball Mania. I've played it ever since it opened. This is the 5th year, and I probably put in 400 entries in that thing over the last 4 years. And I have 0 teams in the finals, So, I mean, those numbers aren't great. But to me, that tells me week 16, I'm doing something wrong. Like I've had a lot of teams just sitting in week 16 and, they don't advance out. But I get all the monies in week 17, and I get like all the analysis, everyone, but I just want to get a team there. So
yeah, no, it makes sense. Especially now, there's a flatter payout structure in week 17, in the finals, and so it makes sense that you just kind of want to be in the dance and hope variance is on your side, and you're able to obviously get first. But even if you don't get first, it's not as bad as it has been historically. And the one thing that you pointed out that I think is really important in that I've noticed too is that when you naturally just team stack, you do find yourself, I'm game stacking. I didn't even realize that I have a correlation now in week 15, and then I have one in week 16. I did that the other day with a Tennessee lineup, and I had like Indianapolis and Cincinnati. I think they had a shared opponent, and I didn't even realize that while it was going on. And it just kind of ended up being that way. And so I think that's one thing to also remember is that there's only 32 teams, right? It's not like we have like 150 teams that we're trying to piece together these puzzles. There's going to be some shared opponents. There's going to be some common opponents, and there's naturally going to be some overlap there whenever you make these team stacks.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's the way I felt like every draft. Maybe like 10% of my drafts, I don't fall into like a week 16, 17 game stack. But yeah, most times you're automatically just falling into that.
Right, in some way. So as we know, these drafts over on Underdog are very, very wide receiver heavy. That leaves a lot of RB2s, most of the RB3s sort of in the middle round range. Let's just call those like the round 8 to round 10 range. I've asked this question to others, but I think it's an important one because this is where a lot of people are starting to get at least their, RB2, RB3. But even, if you go 0 RB, this is where you would get your RB1. And my question to you is, are there any running backs in that range that really stick out, or are you just kind of getting equal exposure to a lot of those guys?
Yeah, there is. It's more of I always draft for more, I said value, right? So I'm looking for those ADP values, but at the same time, I'm looking for in running backs, volume, opportunity. They look good on the depth chart. This team might be ascending, but people think they're a garbage kind of team. So yeah, definitely names stick out to me there, like Ramondre Stevenson, Swift, Connor, Pollard, Singletary. Like all these guys are just going to get volume, and people don't love them because maybe there's a guy beside them in the backfield, and that's fine. Like if I miss on Pollard, I go Spears. So right. So to me, it's not about like I just have to have this player in that range, but there's like 6 or 7 of those running backs that I do really like. It's more based on, I just think they're going to get crazy volume. So if I can get 2 or 3 of those kind of running backs and only say 1 or 2 of them hit out of 2 or 3, I'm fine with that. And I understand like that's how NFL works. That's how fantasy works. Like you're not going to be able to hit 100% on all your picks.
Right. Makes total sense. At the quarterback position, is there a specific way that you're attacking that position? Because to me, it looks pretty efficient this year, the way that drafters are picking quarterbacks and such. I mean, I think that you can certainly make arguments about like where these guys go, but I just mean in the order that they're being drafted. At least you can see the logic. It makes some sense. You mentioned some guys in Dak and Brock Purdy that you seem to be a little overweight on, but how are you attacking quarterback this year?
Yeah, I was actually looking at my percentage owned in this position. I feel like I'm pretty low actually on Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson. I feel like they're a tier of their own, right? Those 3. Yeah. Like if you want them, you got to pay for them. I guess Lamar maybe slips like around on those other two, and I kind of like that value probably more so with him. So maybe I'm fading Allen and Hurts a little more than Lamar. But then from there, like I feel like I try to, in most of my drafts, I'm trying to go running back, receiver, and pretty heavy in those first 6, 7 rounds. Probably, 6 out of 7 of those picks will be from running back or receiver. Yeah, and then that's when QB starts hitting. But yeah, like I was looking at my top owned players for QB, like Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, and Jordan Love. Like those are my main kind of targets. It's mainly because of price. It's mainly because maybe people are a little bit out on them, what they did last year. And maybe they don't have the running ability. So a lot of people you want the rushing ability, right? Like that's what's breaking tournaments. That's that's what's going to give you these huge spike weeks. But I'm looking more for like value in the QB position, and maybe they had a bad year, so you're getting a little bit of value there, and they're still in a good offense. They can still break out, and they're super talented. Like, and I guess there's like some worries on Joe Burrow, like maybe some injury stuff, but I just feel like, I don't know. He's probably my top 3 QB right now, and I just he's so easy to stack. Higgins and Chase.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing, he's one of those quarterbacks that you can really squeeze value out of. If you want to play a game of chicken a little bit with other drafters, like if you did get Chase and Higgins, especially, but even if you just get one of those two, if you know that the other team, who, let's say you get Chase and the other team who has Higgins, if they have good quarterbacks already, or if they passed on him and they're at a part of the draft where, you can extract some of that value, people see, Burrow is one of those quarterbacks, oddly, because it's Joe Burrow, he's one of those quarterbacks that just seems to fall a lot in these drafts. Like I got him in one recently, a good round and a half after ADP, and it's not really that uncommon for him. And I don't know if it's the mobility aspect of things and people, leaning in on that a little bit more, or if it really is, the injury. But I definitely, I've seen that happen with Burrow in particular.
Yeah, I just think he's a crazy value right now. Like, I feel like he's still a superstar, and he's got surrounded by superstar players. And the running game, there's like some question marks there. So same with why I love Prescott, because I feel like Dallas running game, there's so many question marks. So I'm just like loading up on those guys. I just feel like I like Trevor Lawrence a lot too. I just feel like there's a comeback season coming. Everyone's down on him. He's super value. Get him as your QB2, no problem. He's easy to stack. Like, all these guys are pretty easy to stack, and they're on decent offenses. So I mean, maybe you say Justin Herbert, and like, people don't want that offense at all, but I don't know. I kind of like it. I like that he keeps sliding, and I'm going to keep taking him as my QB2.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's Justin Herbert. We've obviously seen what he can do from a ceiling perspective. And I think with Herbert, what I've kind of come to the conclusion with, I don't think he's someone that I'm going to be like massively overweight on, but I'm definitely not going to be underweight. I think it's one of those situations where we're making assumptions about the offense, like you said, where we're assuming that this Greg Roman offense is going to be pretty run heavy, which I think is a proper assumption to make. But when that's already baked into price and baked into the market, then that creates an opportunity for you to draft that player, because we know that it could go the opposite direction, and maybe they are a little bit more pass heavy than what we expect. It's not like Justin Herbert is the kind of quarterback that we've seen with Greg Roman through the years. We had Kaepernick and Tyrod Taylor and Lamar Jackson. Like, this is not the same kind of archetype. So there is a chance that they're a little bit more pass heavy than we expect. So I like that Herbert call too. Speaking of exposures, you were tweeting them out a little bit last week. And I noticed that atop your exposures list, your number one player might have changed since then, to be fair. But that number one player was Courtland Sutton. And I think some people might be surprised by that, because he's not a very sexy pick. Like, it's, we know what we kind of have with Courtland Sutton. He's shown off that he could be, a solid fantasy asset, but maybe not like a massively high ceiling fantasy asset across the season. At least, obviously, weekly spikes can happen for almost anyone. He's got this rookie quarterback, but he's got a situation all by himself. So what is it that makes you attracted to drafting Sutton?
I mean, I just think Judy's gone from there. It was always like last year, we were always like, hey, is it Sutton or Judy? A lot of people were going Judy over him. And then Sutton has like, what do you have, like 10 touchdowns or something?
Yeah.
With Russell Wilson, I get like, now the pushback's like, hey, Russell Wilson's not there. Who's just going to float these touchdowns into him? But I get that part of it. But it's more of, just like a price point for Sutton, and where I can get him as my wide receiver 4 or 5, and I can still go pretty heavy running back as well. Like that's, to me, that's just like crazy best ball value, where I don't have to worry when I start Courtland Sutton. He's just like always there, and maybe he starts every other week, and that's fine. And that he's doing his job, but like hopefully he comes alive in the playoffs, and he's had spike weeks. He's had like multiple touchdown games. So I just feel like people are taking like Jameson Williams and guys over him as like, I don't know. I feel like Sutton should be like there with Deontay Johnson kind of range. So feel like there's a lot of value there still. And you find that value when there's uncertainty on teams. So the Broncos are rookie QB. They've been bad for a couple of years. They traded away their other wide receiver, and Sutton's like, I think he wants a new contract. So there's like a lot of like what ifs with that situation. And I feel like that's why you're getting a pretty good price. So I'm just, he is my highest owned. I think I'm 25% on him. And to a lot of people, 25% is not a lot, like that. Yeah. They probably have like 10 players, 25%. So to me, I'm just going to keep staying around that level. If price goes up, I'll probably drop them down, and I'm happy with around 20% at the end of the year when everything's all said and done on Sutton.
Yeah. Are your exposures relatively flat? I've noticed my highest rostered right now. I think I have like Charbonnet as one of my highest ones, and he's like at like 21 or 22%. Like it's not very, I mean, maybe that's just like an ADP hunting kind of mentality, right? But is that sort of where you're rarely getting guys over the 25% mark? Because I've seen other best ball bros, like I know that Davis Maddock in particular this year is going like really hard with his stances, right? So he's got guys that are in the mid to high 30s pretty frequently. But are you more so in that like 20 to 25% range as like your maximum exposure for a player?
Yeah, I probably play it way too safe than a lot of people. So that's where I'm at. Like over the years, I've got burned too many times, and it doesn't matter. Like if it's a early pick or a late pick, like say your 18th round pick and you're just like 40% on a player, like it could just be like a 0 right from week 2, on.
Right.
So I like learned those lessons a lot. Like injuries are going to happen. Like your 18 man rosters, you really have to construct them in a way to kind of almost foresee injuries, right? Like you're like, okay, 2 or 3 of my running backs are going to be done by week 10, and
right.
That's a lot how I build. Same with receiver. Like, maybe Sutton, maybe he's done by week 5, but he was my wide receiver, 4 or 5 on a team. So it's not going to completely kill me off. And I think maybe the first round or 2, you have to be a little bit more careful on your ownerships there. You don't want to be too high. You don't want to miss out on, there's so many star players. You don't want to take one star player to only miss out on the guy that was going ADP right beside him,
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of the early rounds, another guy that you're high on from an exposure standpoint is Saquon Barkley. I feel like he's been probably the most controversial, top 2 or 3 round guy this year because number one, plays the running back position, obviously. So if you play running back and you're getting drafted early, people are going to yell at that pick. But then number 2, he's going to a situation in Philly where you have Jalen Hurts, mobile quarterback. You have the potential for the tush push. And I think people are a little bit turned off by that. I'm sort of in the middle, so you're not going to offend me by any sort of answer here. But are you? What are you seeing out of Barkley, and why is he? I don't know if he's still your number 2 guy, but why is he up there with in terms of exposure?
I mean, yeah, I am. I mean, obviously I'm an Eagles like fanatic or whatever, but it's not even about that. Like I have like 3% Jalen Hurts, right?
Yeah,
so so to me, it's more like, hey, as a football fan, I'm just kind of seeing maybe the trend is like Hurts is going to run a little less. He looked like garbage last year at the end of the year, to be honest. Like watching all those games for the Eagles fan, like Jalen Hurts was just beat up. They gave him so much money. Like I just don't think they can do it again. Like I don't think they can just run him. I get it, like it's almost automatic, but do we need to do that weeks 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? Like I don't think so. So you bring all this money to Barkley. We know what he is in the past. Like he hasn't been on a good team in a long time. Like he probably didn't sign that contract with Philly just to get sniped on every touchdown.
Right.
So I just feel like it's more of a gut feel on that one. I feel like the community is looking for Najee Harris was the guy last year. Like let's just like. He's awful. He's the worst, and like this year, it's Barkley. Like I feel like we need somebody to plant our flag on, like who's going to be the failure this year. And and look, like Harris was decent last year, and now all those haters are back on him. So
I
don't know. I don't see the hate for Barkley as much. I get like I don't know. Like, who are you taking? Achan over him, I guess, or Kyron Williams? Like, I just think he's a pretty good value there at the 2-3 turn, and I'll just keep scooping it up. And like, I think he could be justifiable, like a first round pick.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ambiguity in round 2 in general, right? Like people are acting like, some of these wide receivers are locked in and they're going to be great picks at the end of the day. I think there's a lot of question marks there. And when Barkley, like you said, when Barkley falls and you're in like the 2 spot and you got CeeDee Lamb and you're thinking about, if you are thinking about week 17 and the correlation there, then all of a sudden you're like, it's very easy to go Barkley's way and have that anchor at running back throughout the rest of your build. And to your point, like the Eagles haven't made an investment like this at running back, during sort of this era, if you will. I mean, they've always kind of had like pieces that they would kind of put together and have this like committee type backfield arrangement. And the fact that they went out, they got Saquon, the more that I've thought about this, the more I think there might just be a little bit too much overthinking of this situation where like we have arguably the most dynamic, best running back prospect. And I understand he's not in year 1 anymore, but arguably one of the best running back prospects of the last 2 decades. And you're on it in an offense that should be strong, probably projected top 10, at least top 10, maybe even top 5. And you're worried about, understandably so, you're worried about what could happen at the goal line, with this guy. But there's some variance there, man. I don't think that we can just assume that things just go the same way that it's gone the last couple of years. Is that sort of the way that you're viewing all of this too? Yeah,
that's the way I'm looking at it. But I also get like, he is my second highest own, and it is a round 2-3 pick. So like, I'm a little nervous there. Maybe I'm missing out on some other guys. So maybe I should dial it down a little bit, and stay around maybe the 15% range or 12%, But to me, I don't know. Like right now, it just feels good. It feels right. If he gets closer to the first round, and then maybe I dial it back then. I've been trying to like bump like Jonathan Taylor ahead of him now.
That's what I was going to ask you. Are you higher on Saquon than Taylor? Because again, taking a step back, the more I've thought about this, it's like, okay, mobile quarterback could steal looks at the goal line similarly, but Saquon's a proven pass catcher. Like Saquon at least has that in his arsenal, and he's shown us that he can be a dynamic pass catcher. Jonathan Taylor's been fine, but it's not like he's been, a 15 to 20% target share player at all throughout his career. Is that so? And I think that we would probably project the Eagles to be better than the Colts from an offensive standpoint. So are you leaning Barkley over Taylor, and now you're just kind of trying to squeeze Taylor in there a little bit more?
That's basically what I'm doing. So like, yeah, if I was on the clock and I was in only one draft all year, I would probably take Barkley over Taylor. But now that I have, maybe only 8% Taylor and 20% Barkley, I'm just trying to like level it out some. But I do agree, like the Eagles, they have AJ Brown, they have, Devontae Smith, and I guess they have Goddard as like a third option. But like, I feel like Barkley might be the third receiver there. Like they've never had like that third receiver. And I feel like that's like something that I get, like Hurts doesn't really throw to running backs as much or whatnot, but maybe they line him out more outside too sometimes. And he is that third receiver. So.
Yeah, look, I think he's going to see a double-digit percentage target share, which is usually the number that you want these guys to get to at a baseline, especially earlier round guys. And I think the ceiling is still there for him to hit like a 15% target share. And so, I'm glad that you had tweeted that because, my exposure to him, I actually had more Barkley, and this is bad because his ADP was higher, but I had more Barkley in pre-draft best ball, in like the big board and stuff like that. And then I started to like get talked out of it a little bit. And now I think I got to just kind of force it a little bit more because of everything that we're talking about here. I mean, there's reasons where these narratives that we build in our minds about how things are going to go down, like we talked about earlier, you can't just assume that things are going to go a certain way, with like Justin Herbert. Yes, that's the most likely outcome, but it's not the outcome, right? There's still an outcome here where, they don't use Jalen Hurts the same way at the goal line, where Barkley is a 10 plus touchdown player. And I don't think it would shock. If we look back on the season, this is another thing I try to do, another exercise I try to do. If we look back on the season, we see Saquon Barkley as a top 5 running back. Are we going to be surprised by that?
Yeah, I do that myself a lot. And yeah, I feel the same way. Like, I feel like Bijan, Brees, McCaffrey, and Taylor, and Barkley. Like those are the guys that stand out to me, like looking at the top of the board. Yeah, and I get like there's some guys on the outside there that could bump too, but I don't know, just the offense he's in, the division he's in, just the opportunities that are ahead for him. So
yeah, makes sense. One thing I did notice with those exposure tweets was your elite tight end, like the top 6, top 7 guys. However you want to define elite this year, because it's not really the same as it was in years past, but they're not really in your top 15, 20 exposed players. Is that due to them being too pricey in your mind, or is it just spreading things out when you do go earlier round tight end? Like you just have a lot of them, but they're, not necessarily, in that like 15 to 20% range. Are there any in particular that you're targeting in that range, or are you just going with a late round tight end approach?
Yeah, like tight ends, like my nemesis over the years. Like I don't understand how to do this in best ball with a tight end position. Yeah. So I try every angle of tight end. So I'll try some elite tight ends, and I'm fine with that. And I'm try some like 3 or 4 late tight ends. But actually, like my favorite spot this year, and I've heard a lot of people say they don't actually like this year, is like the middle tight ends. So like Njoku, Goddard, Kittle, Freiermuth, Kmet, like even Pitts and Evan Ingram, like those are the guys I'm actually, and Bowers, like those are the guys I've actually probably like around 10% plus on. And I'm trying to mix and match 2 of those guys, and then I don't have to draft anymore. So it's not like an elite tight end, but say like I get like like an Ingram and a Goddard, like I'm fine with those 2 tight ends and riding into the sunset, and hopefully in the tournaments, like in the tournament weeks, like one of those guys hits a spike week. Yeah, I get why people want the elite tight ends. It's mainly for the tournament structure. It's mainly for those playoff weeks where the big money is. But even like last year, we saw like Juwan Johnson was like the guy you needed in week 17, So I'm mixing late tight ends. Like sometimes I won't draft a tight end to around like 15, and then I'll just do 15, 16, 17, 18, like 4 tight ends. And, I'm hoping to get my 5, 6 tight end points each week. And in the playoff weeks, I'm hoping to, get double digit number there.
Yeah, I think it's really important because I was realizing that, a lot of my season-long philosophies translate. I often see myself in my season-long philosophies translating to best ball, and it's not a good thing all the time, right? Like it's not the same game. You have to understand that it's not the same game. And historically, from like a season-long points per game perspective, going big or not going at all at tight end has been sort of like the winning strategy through the years, right? Like just get a Kelsey, get an Andrews, or just wait. But the difference is you can play the waiver wire. The difference is you can do things throughout the season to make your tight end room better, whereas you can't do that in best ball, obviously. And what I noticed literally like a week and a half ago was that my mentality was so heavily skewed towards that direction that my exposure to an Njoku, my exposure to a Goddard and to a Bowers, they were maybe not Bowers as much, but Njoku and Goddard in particular were just way too low. And so I started to like really force the issue a little bit more, because I think you're right, where, I almost see tight end like quarterback, where there's just these pockets, right? There's these areas where you can really attack it, as long as you're understanding, like you said, that you can get 2 of those low end tight end ones, like an Njoku and Bowers, and even things out. Or if you go with an early round tight end, like a McBride or whatever, you only need 1 late or something like that. And you're really balancing the tight end position overall.
Yeah, no, and I feel like it's more a construction thing for me, because I do like to kind of go running backs earlier than a lot of people, like even if it's 1 or 2 guys like in the early rounds. So for that, like most of the field right now is going like elite tight end. So for me, you have to, in best ball, you have to sacrifice somewhere. Like you can't have a perfect roster. You're going to have to sacrifice one of your positions. And I feel like the onesie positions are the way to do it. Like you said, QB and tight end, very similar. And that's kind of where I'm trying to feel like more of the middle pockets of those positions. And I'm trying to fill it with 2. And I'm trying to make that 2 be kind of like equivalent to an elite. So that way I can build out my receiver room and my running backs earlier. And it's just part of a construction game. Like I play in my head, but I don't always do it that way. Like sometimes I'll sometimes I'll take like Dalton Kincaid in like 4th round just for fun. If I can get him with Allen, the 3-4 turn, like I'll try to push those elite tight ends when I can stack them. That's usually the only time I'll take them.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Last question for you. Do you have any favorite, because people ask this all the time when they're in round 17, round 18, but do you have any final round picks that you seem to consistently be targeting this year?
I think it comes back to like construction again. Say like I wait at tight end and there's always like a starting tight end there in the last round. So that's a good one. But specific players I really like at the end. I think Roschon Johnson's one of my favorites this year. Like, I don't know. I don't know why he's like falling so much, or he's like a 17th, 18th round pick now. Like nobody wants him. Like I guess they're in on Khalil Herbert, and like I said, I like Swift too, and I'm fine with that. But I just feel like Johnson. Yeah, we don't know what he is quite yet, and he looked decent to me last year, so I don't mind him. Who's like I think Bryce Young and Sanders, the tight end there. I think that's a fun like last round 2-round stack.
Yep.
I like Jonnu Smith. I like Jalen Tolbert. I think he gives you a piece of the Cowboys. Like I said, I don't trust their running game, so I feel like there could be something there. Estime, running back in Denver. I like. Even if you want to wait at QB, like Bo Nix, like Denver's super easy to stack with all those late guys. But like as far as like those aren't really deep sleepers. They're all guys getting drafted in like round 17, 18. But like some of the deeper sleepers, I think like A.T. Perry's fun, Noah Brown, Trey Palmer, Josh Reynolds, and running backs are hard to find like the late guys that nobody's on. But like a name that everyone hates, Alexander Madison, I think is fun. Just
I'm with you, man. I've been drafting Madison too. Yeah.
I just feel like he's a fun like 18th round 6 running back. I don't know. I'm not sold on Zamir White, and I'm not.
Right.
I just feel like the Raiders, like they're not very talented, and maybe Zamir just gets thrown out there and just gets beat up so bad, and they're 1-8, and Alexander Madison just finishes up the season, for a 1-8 team.
Look, we're talking 18th round picks here, man. I mean, this is we're it's not like we're high on Alexander Madison. Yeah, there was a report too that I saw yesterday about the Raiders potentially adding to that running back room. Throughout the summer. And maybe that happens, maybe that doesn't, but I think that just kind of speaks to the volatility and the fragility of that backfield. And anytime there's a backfield like that, I'm willing to just throw a dart at the, 18th round piece of that backfield.
No, for sure. And especially if it's like a team that's not projected to be a really well team, right? Like if they just have a running back room that's just not great, like the Giants too. Like I can't understand the Giants running back room right now. So I think those guys, if you want to take Gray or if you want to take Tracy or whatever, like I think they're super viable in tournament structured teams. So.
Yeah, Tracy's actually one of my highest exposed players right now because I think he has big playability. He's a good pass catcher. I mean, he played wide receiver in college for a good 4 years. And that team, if you look at Singletary and Gray, I think Singletary is like a solid player. But like Gray and Singletary, neither of them are like overly explosive players, right? And Tracy kind of has that element to his game that they lack elsewhere.
No, I think that's a great play, especially they're a bad team and they're losing by the end of the year. They're going to throw Tracy out there. They don't care about Singletary. They don't need Singletary out there. They want to see what they have in Tracy. So
exactly.
I like that. Tell yourself a story. That's kind of how you got to play the best ball game.
Yeah, exactly. James, man, it was great to chat with you and chop it up a little bit. I think people are definitely going to take some good stuff away from this show and this episode. Can you let everyone know where they can find you?
Usually I just share most of my stuff on Twitter. So just at James Brimacombe. Anytime I have like some insights, I'll share some screenshots, whatnot. And I'm drafting a lot of best ball teams, Underdog. I'm on Drafters sometimes and DraftKings not very often. So, all those lobbies, but yeah, and when the puppy comes out, I'll be in those streets and if you have any questions, my DMs are always open. I'm happy to share any best ball insights. You want me to look at your roster, whatever. And yeah, we all learn and grow together. So that's what I love about best ball.
Yeah, and I love what you do on Twitter too. You're just completely transparent about who you're drafting, why you're doing it. You know, there's no, it's fine if you're right. It's fine if you're wrong, because you're, like you said, you know, you're learning with everyone as well. So it's definitely a great follow. Obviously, you guys can find me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Make sure you check out the Late Round Draft Guide over on lateround.com. There's a nice Underdog promo for that. You guys can get it for free with promo code LateRound. But otherwise, everyone, thank you for tuning in.